you could just hear, we are going to record this session, so the recording will be available after the session, of course. So good morning. Today we want to give you a session and some more explanation about Zerto. Some words about Zerto. Zerto is a company that we acquired in the second half of last year. And actually, if you see what Zerto is, it has its foundations on continuous data protection. It will bring disaster recovery, backup, data mobility across private and multi-cloud altogether. And this is, of course, a very interesting product today if you see what the current challenges are based on our storage and our data, which is always growing and growing. So with the trend that we are having a combination of on-premise infrastructure, cloud storage, Amazon, Azure, Google, or whatever, it's of course very important that we are going to manage this this data growth and this amount of data, and that we can also have an easy way going to have the mobility to bring data from one side to another side. Another important thing why Zerto is a very important product in our portfolio is everything what's against ransomware protection. If you see that is the basis of Zerto is continuous data protection, we will be able, based on this functionality, to go back up to just the moment before you were attacked, and that you almost has no data loss at that moment. Can you do the next slide, Yves? And that, if you see, bring all that together, is actually Zerto is a perfect product to solve everything what's unplanned and planned downtime. So you have multiple functionalities that you can cover in Zerto. First of all, and the most important one is disaster recovery. So where you can get recovery very fast in a few minutes, and actually up to the minutes just before your disaster happened. Also on backup and recovery, it's very easy to use it. You have also the ransomware protection in that part, so that you can also going back to the moment that you want it. There are also on long-term retention. You have legal requirements and compliancy is built in on that one. And on level of data mobility, which is an important stuff, because you can also use that in migrations, your data mobility, but you can also do it from on-premise to the cloud to a service provider in Belgium, for example, or hyperscalers. So you have the full flexibility independent from your hardware on your data mobility. And then, of course, the most and the important one is also an important one is test and development, which which you are having the possibility to create sandboxes to test before you are going in production. Maybe one additional word is we will you have the Zerto product as it is. We are also planning this one to build it in our cloud console, so that also from the platform where you're going to manage your storage, you will be able to the same GUI having your disaster recovery features available. And now I give the word to Yves, who will give you some more explanations in details about the functionalities and how Zerto exactly works.
Okay, thank you, Luc, for the introduction. So my name is Yves Venneman. I'm working as a pre-sales consultant within HPE. And the goal of my part of the presentation is to give you a little bit more background information on the technology, the architecture of Zerto, how it works behind the scenes, and what you can do with it. So these are the different topics that we will cover. The most important thing, of course, is a continuous data protection, which is the heart, I would say, of the Zerto possibilities. But of course, once your data is protected, you need to be able to orchestrate and to automate it. We will also see what the capabilities are there. And then overall, you need to be able to take control and to do analytics of the environment. So two very important components which are part of a Zerto architecture. That is, first of all, the central management module, which is a Zerto Virtual Manager. which will be linked to the management infrastructure existing at the customer site. So as you can see, the management infrastructure can be or a vCenter, so for the VMware environments, or it can be SCVMM when we are talking about a Hyper-V environment. So also, as you see, the Hyper-V is supported with Zerto. It's not only about VMware. So through that interface, you do the management of the environment to define which VMs need which type of protection, and that part of the environment runs, as you can see, on a Windows server. Next to it, you have the virtual application appliance, the VRA, and that's in fact, I would say, the working horse, which is doing the tasks defined in your management interface, that your data that you need to protect is protected and is indeed replicated across the wire. So replication can be done or is done in a compressed manner, as well as bandwidth throttling is possible, because sometimes customers don't have the possibility to use the complete bandwidth they have between their data centers. And then, of course, bandwidth throttling is important, that you can also leave some bandwidth for the other applications that needs to go over the wire. So these are very important things, and based on that one, we continue to go a little bit further into the details. So you have the different components, and you have the components not only in the main data center, but also in your backup recovery site. Yeah, so there you have the same thing. And of course, as indicated, the replication happens over the IP network, and you need to have at least 5 megabits of bandwidth available to make that happen. And of course, yeah, that's the minimum, and depending on the number of data that needs to be replicated, yeah, there is a sizer for it, to size the right solution based on the resources needed and the capacity that needs to be replicated from one site to another site. As indicated, replication doesn't need to happen only on-prem. Yeah, of course, that will be many use cases, but replication can also be in the cloud. Yeah, and it's not only about the Azure cloud or the AWS cloud. As you can see, there are also other possibilities where data can be replicated to, and there you have the possibility, as we will see later on, to make scenarios where your production site is or only replicated to an on-prem recovery site, or is only replicated to a public cloud, or is replicated to a local on-prem as well as to the public cloud. So there are quite some flexibilities depending on the customer need. Okay, how does it work? So again, you have your different components. You have your hypervisor, you have the VMs running in the hypervisor, you have the VRA, and then you have your storage. The storage can be the VMDKs as well as RDMs that can be replicated. So for Zerto, you don't need to install any special component on the hypervisor or within the VM. Because it's working on the lower level, the VRA. So when data comes in the VM, of course, data needs to be written to his VMDK in this example. So that is a straightforward process, I would say, to make sure that your application data is written on the local storage. Of course, when the data is written or written into the storage is giving an acknowledgement to the VM that the data is written correctly to make sure that the application can continue to work. And as of that moment, the VRA kicks in and handling the acknowledgement and doing an async write to the VRA. Yeah? So, of course, as you see, the first thing is that the application itself has a commitment that the data is correctly written on the local storage. And what the acknowledgement is done, then the Zerto technology comes in to make sure it intercepts that acknowledgement and to the write and to the replication, as indicated earlier. It's compressed as well as bandwidth throttling possible, and then it's got written to the journal. Yeah. So the journal, and depending on the definition and the configuration, a journal can have data from 1 hour to a maximum of 30 days. But when you want to have a longer capability of recovery, then after 30 days, a journal promotes the data to what we are calling replicate disks for the long-term retention. But I will come back to that also later on. So that's how the basic things are working. Of course, when in a certain situation for the initial sync or when the data, when the intersite connectivity is broken, there are quite some processes behind the scenes to make sure that the initial writes can be fulfilled while the production is continuing to work. So that's a process also internal. Or when you have an intersite disconnectivity, depending on the delay and the time that was in between, different resync mechanisms are possible to make sure that your data is guaranteed and replicated across the wire again, or in a delta resync, or in a bitmap resync, whatever that is needed, it will do that automatically. So what we can do with the journal, the journal is a very important component within the Zerto technology. So as indicated, data comes in, it gets placed into the journal, and in the journal we will put different timestamps. The timestamps are very important to make sure that we can go back in time in case of the need of a recovery. So this means that depending on the journal, as indicated, it can last up to 30 days. You have many recovery points. So suppose you have disaster hits at 10 o'clock, and then you can rewind. You can rewind back in a couple of seconds behind, or 30 days if you go into the journal itself. So this means that you can rewind very fast. Of course, when you have a ransomware, rewind 5 seconds, that will be a challenge to overcome the ransomware attack. But in other disaster recoveries, it can be very helpful and useful to have that small amount of rewinding capability. So when you compare that to a system which is based on snapshotting, because of course storage can give you snapshots. Typically, what we see when a storage snapshot is scheduled, it's not within a couple of seconds that you take every couple of seconds a snapshot. So in average, you take, let's say, every 4 hours or 2 hours a snapshot. So in worst case, you need to recover from that snapshot, which is 2 or 4 hours. And in case you need to recover from a backup, typically a backup, customers take only once a day a backup. So in worst case, you need to recover from 24 hours. So here you see that Zerto gives you quite some more flexibility to make sure that in case of a disaster, I would say that is the logical disaster, the physical disaster, to have a rewind for a couple of seconds back, and that you can continue to work without losing hours of data, or in the worst case, maybe days of data. So as indicated, we have the short term, so the journal, and we have the long-term retention, which can last for quite some years if needed. And of course, the recovery can be done out as well as the long-term retention. And long-term retention is something which is possible. I will come back to that later on through on-prem capabilities or also in a public cloud. In the context of recovery, so the recovery can be happening on different levels. The level of the site, if you are losing your complete site, of course you need to be able to continue on the other side where you have put your applications on, or you can work more granular on the application level. Also there I will come back what that means. On an individual VM as well on an individual file. So quite some high level up to file level restores which are possible with the Zenko technology. So how to recover? Yeah, the interface is quite straightforward, I would say. You get the interface, and then you get an overview of the different timestamps to select from. So you can rewind very simple in time, not only for disasters, but also to make or use that to create sandboxes, to do testing isolated from the production network and so on. Important is that we can also have not only crash consistent replication, but also application consistent replication. So that means we have the right order of every IO that comes in from the application in an application consistent manner replicated to the other side. Yeah, so we can recover, as indicated already, in a couple of seconds very fast. So suppose you need to recover file recovery in this example. Yeah, you select the name from where you want to recover from. This example is a SharePoint where we want to recover files from the VM. Then we select our date, from which date we want to recover the file. And then we start mounting. Yeah. So what's happening is in the backend that Zerto will mount that VM and to be able to browse into the VM itself. So that's all done automatically, as you can see on the screen. And then we have an overview of the content of that VM. And of course, we can select which drive, which file we want to recover. And then we have the capability to do the download of that file. So we can download it and send it back to the end user if needed, or you can restore it to the production place. Okay, so that was already how to recover from the high level to the file level detail. The next I want to talk about is application consistency. Yeah, so if you want to replicate, many times we are replicating VMs, but a VM probably is part of a bigger environment of an application set. Yeah, so maybe you have an application with web servers, and application server, database servers, file servers. They all work together for that use case that end users are using. So that means if we replicate every VM individually, yeah, so we replicate the application server individually from the web servers, we replicate the web server individually from the database server, and so on. Every VM is indeed replicated, that's no problem, that's no issue, but at the end to end, the complete chain of the different components for that usage, yeah, maybe there is not a consistency in between them. Yeah, so that's why with Zerto what we can do is making a configuration where all the things that are linked together, we are putting them together in what we are calling a virtual protection group. So that means that all the IO consistency across the different modules are consistent in the replication and happen on the same time. So that means we are not only protecting one individual VM, but we are protecting an environment. Yeah? And then we can, of course, scale that again. And if needed, we can recover the environment to a certain point in time. And that means that as well as a file server and a database server as web server can be recovered to the same point in time when needed. So that gives you also more consistency, not only individually, but for an environment. And based on that, we can have some creative scenarios where we want to protect a VM in multiple ways. So a VM can be part of more than one VPG, yeah, up to 3 maximum. But let's take a scenario where one VM is part of 2 VPGs, and you have another VM, another group where other VMs are part of, and then you can make different configurations. But also there, we can make that type of configuration where we have a protected site, one VM, and that VM is replicated, as you can see, 2 times. Now, 1 time to the recovery site in case of a disaster of the recovery, and it's also replicated locally maybe for a sandbox, yeah, or for whatever reason on the protected side. So that VM is protected on the local side, and we want to use that VM, the copy of that VM, as a recovery or as a sandbox or whatever. And then, of course, we can protect it to the recovery side. So the same scenario, but instead of having a copy on the on-prem secondary side, we copy the VM to the cloud. Yeah, so then we have not only a protection of the VM on-prem, but we have also a copy in the cloud. So there we have quite some possibilities. And of course, also this mechanism can be used to make sure that in case of a migration, that we can have a smooth migration from A to B. So we have our protection side, recovery side, to make sure that our primary volume or primary VM is always protected. And then we can create another one to another recovery side, and everything can be migrated in a transparent way. The next topic I want to cover is the long-term retention. So we have seen that we have the production, we have the replica side where we can put the data in. And then, of course, we have also the capability if we want to keep our data for years or months or in a longer period of time. So there we have the repository for the long-term retention. And as indicated, we have two possibilities. We have the possibility to have on-prem copy for long-term that can be or through a file share, or also we can use the Catalyst StoreRuns API so that data in the long-term is put it on the StoreRuns on-prem, which gives you also, of course, based on the StoreRuns Catalyst, the duplication capacity efficiency. Or if you don't want to have the long-term data on-prem, as you can see, we can put that in the cloud. Yeah, so different clouds are supported, Azure, AWS, and depending on what you want to have, you can have a hot tier as well as a cold tier for optimizing your cloud cost, because we know that putting data in the cloud is not always for free. So there are the possibility. Okay, so we have seen the replication, some creativity, what we can do with the replication, all based on the journaling to be able to rewind very fast and quickly to make sure that not only one VM, but a complete environment can be put together in application consistency group. And then in the long term, we can have also the flexibility to keep our data in the longer run on-prem or in the cloud. So the next couple of things I want to mention are the automation and the orchestration, the multi-cloud, the workload mobility, and things like that. First of all, Zerto gives you a very nice interface to manage your environment. Yeah? So with that interface, as you can see on the screen, you have a nice overview of the workload, the IOPS, the throughput, the WAN traffic, to follow what is happening or where there are potential bottlenecks, the health, if everything is okay, alerting is mentioned on the screen. And of course, if you need to make your configuration very easy to define a site, to import the VMs, to get the monitoring and things like that. Okay, suppose you need to do a failover, yeah, that you have a problem in your primary site. So what you are doing, you are clicking on the failover tab. But if you need to do a test, you can do the same thing, of course. That's more for the sandbox way of working. This is a scenario for the failover. You are clicking the failover. You are selecting which VMs you want to recover from. And then you want to select your point in time. So you scroll back to a couple of seconds or hour in the short run or years in the long run. And then you start your failover and that's it. Yeah, so then everything continues. But there are again different use cases to activate the failover. So as indicated, you have your production side with your environment, which is replicating to the replication side. And depending on the problem that you have. You are completely lost your production site. So that means, as you have seen the steps before, you can do the failover complete in an easy way, and the VMs are restarting, and you can continue to work, and everything continues as before. Another scenario is doing tests. So that means that your production site is still working. You don't have any problem on your production site, but you want to do the test failover and to make sure that you want to test your procedures if everything is working. You want to test if the VMs are starting up, if the application is starting up, but of course you need to do that in the bubble. Yeah? So there you create a kind of bubble, so the VMs will not be connected to the network where your primary VMs are working on. So you create that sandbox in which you start your test failover, in which you will start the VMs to make sure that everything can happen. And that means that you have a very easy way to maintain your failover procedures, because that's important in a customer environment. It's nice to have your production replicating to the recovery side, and maybe during setup and validation, you are testing your failover. But hopefully you don't have a disaster every month or every year. So that means you need to be able to maintain your procedures, because things can change on your application landscape. And you need to make sure that you are testing the failover capabilities. If disasters happens, that your procedures are up to date. So you can do that, and you can also document that. Yeah, Zerto gives you the possibility to create a document of the things that will happen in which order, and that can also be used to get into your disaster recovery procedures to make sure that after X amount of weeks or months, you update these, and you are up to date, and you know in case of a disaster what you need to do, and you are sure that things can work. The third thing of the replication is in the context of mobility and more in migration. Yeah, so you have your production site, you have a target site, and you want to migrate from your production site to your target site. So it's not a matter of having only the failover, but in fact migrating, because on your production site, maybe the site is closing down, or maybe you have old equipment that you need to refresh, and you go to a new site, you go to a new environment, and then you have the migration capabilities. Migration capabilities are there on a technical level, and on a license level, there are separate licenses available to make sure that you don't need to pay the full-blown complete replication only for the migration. So licenses are there for that use case. Okay, if customers want to automate things, as you can see, Zerto has APIs, yeah? So it can be scriptable, and there you can use the different things. It can be integrated into the Puppet, Terraform, Ansible, and things like that. So also if customers want to do that, no problem, and as well as it can be used as indicated earlier through the interface. So the resources, typically, these things are available on the GitHub. There is also the links that you can see, or the Zerto forum, or the GitHub page where things can be downloaded and used. Talking about GitHub, we are coming into the Kubernetes world. Yeah? So also there, Zerto has the capabilities of not only protecting the classical VMs, I would say, but also the containers based on Kubernetes. There is also a comparable architecture, I would say. So in Kubernetes, we are talking on the worker nodes where your applications are running, where the different pods are running. There you have also the VRA of Zerto. Again, high-level architecture is comparable. So you install the VRAs on the worker nodes, and then you have your Zerto Kubernetes manager, again, which are managing which pod need to be protected in which manner, and they make sure that the data gets replicated, and if case of a disaster, it can fail over from one to the other. Yeah, so also here, there is a different license. So there is a Kubernetes Zerto license, and it's based on CPU. Yeah, it's not based on the number of containers you are running, because that would be a little bit of a challenge in the VMware world. Quite often we know how many VMs we are running, but in a Kubernetes container world, yeah, it's very difficult to determine how many containers they are running, because containers can scale up, scale out, depending on the workload and things like that. So that's why for this environment, the licenses are based on CPUs, on the workload nodes, and not only on the containers running in the environment. Zerto, as indicated, has also the capability of doing analytics, so and taking control of your environment and see what is happening within the environment. So it's all managed through one single interface, to make sure that not only the management can be done on the environment as explained, but also that things can be analyzed to make sure that we know what is happening, we can intervene if needed, and this is look as well for the cloud analytic capability, as well for the hybrid on-prem capability. So again, the dashboard to see your environment, how many sites do you have, how many VMs do you have, which capacity is protected, how many groups do you have in total, what is the average RPO, which is interconnectivity between the different environments, where are the environments situated, as you can see in Amsterdam, Boston, and so on. And then indeed, if there are any alerting somewhere which tasks are running, and if there are events happening, and what the status of it. So that's the first thing on the dashboard. You can monitoring what is happening in your environment. And then, of course, you have the analytics. Again, analytics on the different levels, and analytics on the throughput, the performance in the environment, and you can go more and more in detail to determine which configuration is having which workload or which behavior active. So as Zerto is using the IP network, I think it's very important to be able to following up the usage of that network. Yeah? So also there in the analytics, you have quite some reporting capabilities of to see how your network is used, where the bottlenecks are, to determine if your RTO can be met, yes or no, if you need to increase your bandwidth throttling. All of these things can be asked in the analytic to make sure that everything continues in the expected way, and that you can anticipate on the bottlenecks and increase and or solve these bottlenecks in your environment. So again, where to use Zerto? As you see, Zerto is software. So this means, in fact, we can use Zerto for any storage device. So that means any storage device, not only from HPE, but also non-HPE, yeah, because it's software, it's hardware independent. So that means, yeah, we can migrate from any storage to preferable, of course, HPE. And for HPE, yeah, it can be whatever storage. Yeah, it can be MSA, it can be Nimble, it can be Primera, Alletra, or whatever storage that the target can be. Yeah. So I would say this can also open for extra business, yeah, not only for HPE, but maybe also for you as a partner, as a customer, that you are not having a link that, okay, you have a storage device and then you need to stay with that storage vendor to make sure you can replicate from one to the other. So Zerto gives you the capabilities. And as indicated, if you don't want to replicate on-prem, no problem. We can also replicate, as mentioned, to the cloud. So this is an example for with SimpliVity. Yeah? So SimpliVity, we know that SimpliVity gives also the capability of doing replication. That's for sure. You can do replication in one data center. We can do replication across data centers with SimpliVity. but maybe again, we want to extend that one and we want to replicate to the public cloud. So as you can see, also there could be a use case where SimpliVity is used on-prem at the customer side and maybe across different sites, where nevertheless, even if SimpliVity gives you the protection level, the customer requirement is that data also needs to be recovered or put it into the public cloud, maybe for the long-term recovery if needed, or maybe for compliancy, for whatever reason that the customer wants to put his data into the cloud. So for the people who needs to configure it, it's integrated into the HPE chain, I would say. So there are HPE capabilities with using the classical tools, OCA, and also where you can do that configuration. So this was what I had foreseen. I've seen that I'm quite in time with my presentation, so I don't know if there are any other questions. I will have a look in the chat because I've seen that some people has put some text into the chat. One of them was sandbox functionality. I think I covered that one. That sandbox capability is possible. Any plans to offload the overhead generated by the VRA to the storage? So storage snapshot integration. I don't think so. That is possible today. I don't know. We need to cross-check if that is a roadmap item, maybe. But as indicated, today Zerto is intervening into the IOs from the VM to the storage when the acknowledgement is happening. So if we want to do the VRA based on storage snapshotting, where this is not happening anymore, I'm wondering how to solve that thing, that snapshot can be picked up by Zerto in the way it's working today, at least, to that storage integration. So I would say today, no, that's not possible, but in IT, never say never, of course, but today not. Which verifications are performed automatically, or is this manual verification? I don't know what you mean with verification. Maybe you need to elaborate a little bit more on what you mean with verification. What happens if the management is compromised? If the management is compromised, as far as I know, the replication will still happen. Of course, yeah, if through the management interface nothing is reconfigured, I would say, but if it only the management interface which is not available anymore, every policy which has been defined will continue to work. Of course, you are driving blind as the management interface is not there anymore, but your protection still is in place. Can we use Zerto to replicate between VMware and Hyper-V? I need to cross-check it and confirm it. I thought I saw indeed capabilities, but I'm not sure. So we'll come back on that one to confirm what the possibility is. And then another one which came in with VM, can you, for example, verify if the VM got booted, heartbeat, the DNS, how far the Zerto goes with the application on the sandbox? On the sandbox, so there, in fact, as you have seen in the slide, we are doing a VM startup, I would say. Yeah, so we expect that the VM, once you boot the VM in this test mode, that the VM can boot. And it's up to, I would say, the VM and the VMware environment that boot is doing and working correctly. So I would say that's a little bit different as with Veeam, but if needed, we can come back to that later on and then confirm what Zerto is doing more than only make sure that the VM is booting and then it's handed over to the VMware or Hyper-V. The capacity for the journals, so indeed, as you have seen, so we have the journal where we are keeping track of what the things which are happening. I don't know by heart which capacity in average we need for these ones, but that again is part of the sizing exercise, I would say, where we take a view of what type of VMs and which capacity needs to be protected. And then, of course, based on the sizing and the best practices, we will propose a certain amount of capacity which is needed for the journal. So how can you recover from the management interface, the management interface server? This one I need to cross-check. Yeah, of course, reinstallation will be done because it will be compromised. But the question, I think, is how to re-enable or to re-import the existing configuration and the existing policies. That I need to cross-check what the procedure is for that one. So that's, again, one topic where we will come back to you.
Thank you, Yves. If somebody else has a question, you can also raise your hand and then I will unmute you. If there is still one question, how is it licensed per socket?
Yeah, the license is so as indicated when we are talking about VMware VMs, it's licensed per VM. And there are packages for VMs. And when we are talking about Kubernetes, as indicated, is licensed on the CPUs for the worker nodes.
Okay, thank you, Yves. If there are no other questions, I want to thank you all for attending the session of today. And also, and you will see it very shortly, I want to invite you already for the next session on 25th of February, where we are going to give you more information about our data services console and all nice things that are upcoming in that one. So thank you very much for attending and see you very soon.